A poor widow begged, "Please bury my child. The mountain man's response will shock you." Snow fell in thick, unrelenting sheets across the mountain pass, swallowing sound and hope alike. The woman stumbled through it, her arms cradling a small bundle close to her chest. Her lips were pale, cracked from the cold, her breath shallow but steady as she pressed forward. Beneath the rough linen wrap, the child lay still, too still. She whispered to him as if her words could warm him, as if love could defy death. At last, she reached a lonely cabin at the edge of the frozen woods, a faint orange light flickering through the cracks of the shuttered window. The smell of pine smoke and thawing fur filled the air. She hesitated, then knocked. The door opened to reveal a man with a thick beard and shoulders like hewn stone, his fur vest dusted with snow. His eyes met hers, cold as the wind outside, until they dropped to the still form in her arms. "Please," she whispered, her voice breaking like glass. "Please bury my child." For a long time, he said nothing. The storm raged between them. Then, without a word, he stepped aside, allowing her in. The warmth of the fire seemed to mock her grief. She sank to the floor, clutching her child as if the heat might breathe him back to life. The man crouched beside her, lantern in hand, watching her face as if searching for something, courage, perhaps, or faith. He rose and moved to a large stone bowl on the hearth. The sound of grinding herbs filled the silence, rhythmic and deep. Blue smoke rose from the mixture, curling like whispers in the dim light. The woman watched through tears, unsure whether to believe in what she was seeing. "I've buried many things in these mountains," he said finally, his voice low, like thunder rolling beneath the earth. "But not this one, not yet." She wanted to protest, to scream that the child was gone, that his tiny heart had stopped somewhere in the snow, but her voice failed her. The man dipped his hand into the glowing mixture, its smoke curling into the air like threads of spirit. He pressed the paste gently across the child's chest, his rough hands trembling only once. "Life leaves slow," he murmured, "if love holds fast." The room filled with the strange scent of pine and fire. The woman closed her eyes, clutching the small body to her breast. For a heartbeat, there was only silence, then a faint, fragile gasp broke it. Her eyes flew open. The child stirred. Tears streamed down her face as the man sat back, his breath ragged. She wanted to thank him, but words were too small, too hollow. He turned away, as if afraid that if he looked too long, the miracle might vanish back into the snow. Days passed. The storm quieted. The cabin became a fragile refuge, bound together by firelight and gratitude. At night, she would watch him by the flames, his massive frame bent over small, delicate tasks, mixing herbs, carving wooden toys, listening to the child's quiet breathing. He never spoke of what he had done, never asked her name, and she never asked why a man who lived alone in the mountains had learned to bring life back from its edge. One evening, when the child slept and the fire burned low, he set a small wooden chest on the table between them. From it, he drew a single stone that glowed faintly blue in the firelight. He handed it to her, their fingers brushing. "This belongs to you now," he said. "Keep it close. It reminds the heart that light doesn't die, it only hides, waiting to be found again." She took the stone, her eyes reflecting its glow. The child stirred in her arms, peaceful and warm. The snow continued to fall beyond the window, but inside the cabin, the world was still, lit by fire, by faith, and by something far stronger than either, the quiet, unspoken mercy of a mountain man who had learned, perhaps the hard way, that not every burial needs to be the end. The stone's faint light pulsed softly between her fingers as if it held a heartbeat of its own. The cabin walls whispered in the firelight, every flicker drew long shadows that shifted like memories across the wooden beams. The man sat back in silence, his rough hands folded before him, eyes dark and unreadable. The woman, still unnamed to him, studied the blue glow, feeling its warmth seep into her palms. The child slept soundly against her breast, small breaths steady and sure, no longer shallow and fading like before. Outside, the storm had gentled into a snowfall so light it looked like dust in the moonlight. The world beyond the window was vast, white, and soundless. Inside, time seemed to slow, as if the mountain itself were holding its breath. She set the stone on the table, afraid its glow might fade if she gripped it too tightly. "Why did you help me?" she asked at last, her voice quiet, careful, as though the wrong word might break whatever fragile thread of grace had bound them together. The man did not look at her immediately. He stared into the fire, eyes distant, the muscles in his jaw shifting like something unspoken moved beneath the skin. "Because someone once did the same for me," he said. She waited, hoping he would say more, but he did not. The flames crackled, their light painting his face in amber and shadow. She wanted to ask who that someone was, what had been lost, but she sensed that the story lived deep beneath his ribs, buried, like everything else he had once cared for. The child stirred, a soft murmur escaping his lips. She rocked him gently, humming a lullaby that barely existed anymore, something her mother had sung long ago in another winter, another world. The man listened, eyes half closed, and though he said nothing, his breathing slowed, his shoulders eased. When the song ended, she noticed his hand resting unconsciously on the edge of the table, close to the glowing stone. In the days that followed, the woman and her child remained in the cabin. The man, whose name she still did not know, spoke little, but his silence grew less sharp. He hunted in the woods, moving like a shadow between trees heavy with snow. When he returned, his beard glittered with frost, and the scent of pine and blood clung to him. He would set the meat by the fire and carve pieces with slow, deliberate motions, as though each act were a prayer. Sometimes, she helped him prepare herbs. He taught her which to dry by the hearth, which to grind with stones, and which to burn to ward off sickness. The blue smoke returned often, curling in slow patterns through the dim air. It had a scent she could never name, something between earth and sky, grief and hope. At night, when the wind howled, they sat in quiet companionship. He repaired tools or fletched arrows while she mended her torn dress with thread scavenged from an old blanket. The child, now stronger, would reach for the man's broad hand, tugging at his sleeve. At first, the mountain man ignored him, but one evening, as the boy gurgled in delight at the dancing flame, the man handed him a smooth stone, shaped like an egg, polished by the river's patience. The boy held it close, fascinated by the way it caught the light. "You have a gentle soul," she said softly. He looked up, startled, as if the words struck something he'd long forgotten. "Gentle," he repeated under his breath, almost tasting the word. "No, I've been too long in these woods to be gentle. But you saved us," she said. "That takes more than strength." He said nothing, but the firelight softened his eyes, and for the first time, she saw not just the mountain in him, but the man who once lived before the silence claimed his heart. Days turned into weeks. The snow thickened, sealing the cabin off from the world below. They shared food, stories in fragments, and long silences that spoke more than words ever could. She told him her husband had died in the mines the previous winter, buried under stone and ice. She'd tried to make a life in the village, but hunger and pity were cruel companions. When the fever took her son, she'd carried him into the storm, seeking a place where she could bury him under clean snow, where no one would mock her prayers. And instead, she said quietly, "I found you." He said her name for the first time that night, softly, as though it were sacred. "Alara." She blinked, surprised. "How do you?" "I heard you whisper it to him when you thought he was dying." She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. He reached across the table, his calloused fingers brushing the back of her hand. Just once, but in that single touch, there was more tenderness than a lifetime of words could hold. When the thaw came, it came suddenly. The snow melted in rivers that carved through the forest floor, revealing green shoots beneath the frost. Birds returned, tentative at first, then in full chorus. The mountain seemed to breathe again. Alara began to help him outside the cabin, tending to small patches of soil where he grew herbs. She laughed when she saw how carefully he lined each seed, how gently his massive hands cradled the roots. "You handled them as if they were glass," she teased. He smiled faintly. All things worth keeping are fragile. The boy, whom she called Liren, began to walk that spring. His laughter filled the valley, light and bright, like a melody the mountain hadn't heard in years. The man would watch him from the porch, his expression unreadable, but his eyes softened each time the child stumbled and got up again. Sometimes, when Alara caught him watching, she saw in his gaze something almost like longing, an ache shaped by memory. Once, she found him carving small wooden figures by the fire. A woman, a child, and beside them, a wolf. The carvings were rough, but full of care. Who were they? She asked quietly. He paused, knife hovering midair. The fire popped. My wife. My son. Alara felt the weight of his words settle into the room. He did not speak for a long time, but when he did, his voice carried the weariness of old grief. They were taken by the fever. The same one your boy had. I buried them before the first snow. He looked at the small figure in his palm. I thought I'd buried my soul with them. Alara reached forward, her fingers brushing his wrist. And yet, you saved mine. That night, as they sat in the hush between firelight and moonlight, she placed the glowing stone, the one he had given her, on the table again. It pulsed faintly, its light steady and alive. Tell me, she whispered, what is it? He hesitated, then spoke in a tone that seemed older than either of them. A gift, or a curse. I found it in the mountains after they died. I thought it was just a stone, but when I touched it, I saw her, my wife, standing in the snow, holding our boy. And for a moment, I heard her voice. She told me the stone would find its way to another heart when mine had finished grieving. Alara looked down at it, the blue light shimmering across her face. And you believe it saved my son? He met her gaze. I don't believe in miracles. But I've learned not to doubt them. Seasons turned again. The snow returned, softer this time, less cruel. The bond between them deepened. Not spoken, not confessed, but woven through every shared glance, every quiet evening spent by the fire, every morning when the first light found them still together beneath the same roof. Liren grew taller, his laughter louder. He followed the man through the forest, learning to track deer, to listen to the wind. Alara watched them from the doorway, her heart full and strange, knowing that the world had once taken everything from her and yet had given something back she never thought she would hold again: peace. One evening, as dusk settled over the cabin, the man returned with his bow slung over his shoulder. His breath was heavy, but not from the hunt. His face was pale, and his right hand clutched his side where a dark stain spread beneath his fur vest. Alara ran to him, catching him before he fell. What happened? Wolf, he gasped. Old one. Big. Cornered near the ridge. She tore his vest away and pressed cloth to the wound, but the blood ran too fast. Her hands trembled, her heart pounding. Stay still. I'll make a poultice. He caught her wrist weakly. Alara, stop. No, she said, tears blurring her sight. Don't tell me to stop. You can't. Listen. His voice was faint now, rasping. The stone. Take it. It belongs to Liren now. She shook her head violently. Don't you dare talk like that. You said it was a gift. Then let it save you, too. He smiled. A small, broken thing. It doesn't save lives, Alara. It restores what's meant to be found. The boy woke then, frightened by the noise, clutching his blanket. He ran to them, eyes wide. The man placed his trembling hand on the child's head. Be strong, little one. The mountain listens to hearts like yours. Alara pressed the glowing stone to his chest, desperate. The light flared, brighter than it ever had before, filling the cabin with a radiance that seemed to breathe. For an instant, she thought she heard whispering, the same blue smoke curling again from the fire, rising like spirit. The air shimmered. Then, just as suddenly, it faded. The man lay still, the stone dimmed to a pale, pulseless gray. The silence that followed was vast. Alara bowed her head, the tears falling freely now, onto his lifeless hand. Liren clung to her, small and trembling. The fire crackled, casting shadows over the man's face, calm now, as though sleep had simply taken him back into the mountain. She buried him where the ridge met the sky, where the first light of dawn touched the snow. The wind was gentle that day, carrying the scent of pine and smoke. Beside the grave, she placed the gray stone, now cold and ordinary. Liren stood beside her, silent. Will he come back? He asked softly. She knelt, cupping his cheek. He already has, she said. Years passed. The cabin aged, but it never crumbled. Alara and Liren tended the land, growing herbs, trapping game, surviving each winter with the quiet strength she had learned from the mountain man. She often spoke to him in her prayers, telling him of their days, their harvests, the laughter that still filled the valley. One spring, as Liren turned 15, he brought her a stone he'd found by the riverbank. It was smooth, round, and faintly blue beneath the sun. "Mother," he said, "look what I found." Her breath caught. She took it in her hands, warm, pulsing faintly, alive. That night, she dreamed of the mountain man again. He stood by the ridge, his form half light, half shadow, watching her. "The mountain gives what the heart can bear," he said. "Keep the light, Alara." It was never mine to begin with. When she awoke, the fire still burned. The stone glowed softly on the table, and though the years would continue to turn, though loss and joy would weave their endless pattern, she knew this truth as sure as the breath in her chest. Some miracles do not save, they teach. Some hearts are buried only to bloom again. And when the storms came once more, she would sit by the fire, her son beside her, and the blue light would pulse gently between them, eternal as the mountain, tender as the mercy that once changed the course of their lives forever. Years folded into each other the way snow folds into rivers, silent, seamless, inevitable. Alara's hair silvered as the seasons turned, though her spirit never bowed. The mountain had shaped her into something both fierce and tender, something that could weather loss and still find beauty in the breaking. Liren grew into a man of quiet strength, the reflection of both her heart and the one who had once saved them. His shoulders carried the same calm weight, his hands the same patience that had belonged to the mountain man. He spoke little, but his eyes always searched the horizon as if listening to something beyond the wind. The cabin endured, though time softened its edges. Moss crept along the logs, the chimney leaned with age, and yet its fire never went out. Every evening, as twilight bled into indigo, Alara lit the hearth and placed the blue stone at its center. It pulsed softly, the same as ever, a rhythm older than words, a memory made of light. One winter evening, when the air was sharp enough to bite, Liren returned from hunting with a quiet unease in his step. He stood in the doorway, snow melting in his hair. "There's smoke," he said. "Beyond the ridge, someone's out there." Alara looked up from her weaving. "No one comes this far in winter." "I know." His brow furrowed. "But I saw it, a thin trail, like the kind from a small fire." The memory of her own arrival, so many years ago, flickered through her. The storm, the cold, the desperate knock at a stranger's door. She set aside her weaving and stood. "Then we'll go." The sky was bruised with the color of coming snow as they followed the narrow path up the ridge. The world was still, except for the crunch of their boots and the slow whisper of wind through bare pines. When they reached the crest, they saw it, a faint curl of smoke rising from a hollow below, and beside it, the outline of a small figure huddled in the snow. Liren rushed ahead. The figure was a young woman, barely more than a girl, clutching a small bundle to her chest. Her lips were blue, her eyes wide with fear and exhaustion. "Please," she whispered. Her eyes wide with fear and exhaustion. "Please," she whispered, her voice trembling like thin ice. "Please, help me, my child. He's not breathing." The world seemed to tilt. Alara felt the years collapse inward, each one folding over the memory of her own plea, the night she had begged the same words at another's door. "Bring her," she said softly. Quickly. Back at the cabin, the fire roared to life. Alara wrapped the girl in furs while Liren knelt beside the motionless infant. His face was pale, determined, but his hands were steady. Alara reached for the small wooden box that had never left the hearth. She opened it, and there lay the blue stone, faint but alive, as if it had been waiting. "Mother," Liren murmured, eyes fixed on her. "Is it time?" She nodded. "It's always been waiting for its turn." The girl watched, too weak to speak. Her eyes darted between them, caught between disbelief and hope. Liren took the stone, its light pulsing faintly against his palm. He placed it against the child's tiny chest. The glow deepened, threads of azure weaving through the air like breath made visible. For a moment, the cabin filled with that same hum that Alara had felt so many years ago, the sound of something neither living nor dead but existing in the sacred space between. The child's body shuddered once, twice, then drew a shallow, fragile breath. His fingers twitched. His eyes opened. The girl cried out, clutching her son to her chest. Tears streaked down her face, a river of disbelief and gratitude. Liren stepped back, the light fading from his hands. Alara felt her heart swell and break all at once. The miracle had come full circle. The stone's glow softened, pulsing slower now, weaker, as if it had given the last of its grace. When dawn came, the storm had passed. The girl and her baby slept by the fire, wrapped in warmth and safety. Liren stood at the window, staring out toward the ridge where the first light touched the snow. "She'll live," he said quietly. Alara nodded. "And so will he. The mountain has seen to that." He turned to her. "But the stone." She held it up. It no longer glowed. It was just a stone now, gray and smooth, its magic spent. She turned it in her hand, smiling faintly. "It's done what it was meant to do. It doesn't need to shine anymore." He frowned slightly. "What happens to it now?" Alara looked toward the ridge, the same place where she had once buried the man who had changed everything. "It goes home," she said. They climbed the ridge together as the sun climbed higher. The snow glittered like glass. At the summit, the world stretched endlessly, forests below, rivers frozen in silver threads, peaks rising like sleeping gods. Alara knelt at the same spot where she had once laid the mountain man to rest. The years had buried his grave beneath wildflowers and frost, but she felt him there still, silent and steady beneath the earth. She placed the stone in the snow. For a moment, the wind died completely. Then a single ray of sunlight broke through the clouds, catching the surface of the stone, and for one heartbeat, it shone blue again. Alara closed her eyes, smiling through tears. "You kept your promise," she whispered. When they returned to the cabin, the girl was awake, sitting by the fire. Her child slept peacefully in her arms. She looked up, eyes wide with wonder. "How can I ever repay you?" Alara reached for her hand. "You already have. Just lie. Raise him well. Teach him kindness, even when the world gives you none." The girl nodded, silent tears glistening on her cheeks. That evening, after the girl and her child had left for the valley below, the cabin felt both emptier and lighter, as if it had exhaled something long held. Liren sat across from his mother, the fire painting soft gold across their faces. "You think we'll see her again?" he asked. Alara smiled. "Perhaps. But it doesn't matter. The mountain remembers. That's enough." Outside, snow began to fall again, slow and silent, not cruel this time, but soft, forgiving. Alara watched it through the window, her reflection mingling with the white world beyond. She thought of the man who had once opened his door to her, the way his eyes had held both sorrow and mercy. She thought of the stone, the way it had glowed in her darkest night, and the way its light had found a new heart to save. She realized then that the miracle had never been in the stone itself. It had lived in the hearts that carried it, in the hands that chose compassion over despair, in the courage to open one's door when the storm was at its fiercest. When she finally rose, she went to the window and opened it. The cold rushed in, sharp and clean, but she didn't flinch. She closed her eyes and whispered to the wind, her words carried out into the wild. "Thank you." The wind stirred in answer, a low, familiar murmur, like a voice half remembered. It moved through the trees, around the cabin, and across the ridge, where it danced with the snow before disappearing into the endless sky. That night, Alara dreamed again. She stood on the ridge, the stars blazing above her, the mountain man waiting just beyond the light. He smiled, the same quiet smile she had seen only once in life. Beside him stood her younger self, holding the baby she once thought lost. Time folded into itself, no beginning, no end, only the circle. Unbroken. When she awoke, the fire was low, and dawn spilled pale gold through the window. Liren slept near the hearth, his head bowed, peaceful. Alara felt the stillness settle around her like a benediction. The world outside would keep turning. The snow would fall and melt, the rivers would thaw, and the light would find its way into new hearts. She knew now that the stone's purpose had never been to conquer death. It had been to remind the living to open their doors, to hold one another through the storm. She looked once more toward the ridge. Somewhere up there, beneath layers of snow and time, the stone lay buried, its light spent yet eternal in memory. She smiled softly. The mountain had kept its secret, and so would she. Alara lay back beside the fire, her eyes closing as the warmth wrapped around her. Her breath slowed, her lips curved in peace. Outside, the snow continued to fall, quiet, endless, and kind. And when the wind passed through the pines, it carried with it a whisper, so faint it might have been imagination, yet clear enough for the mountain to hear. Not every burial is the end. Thank you so much for watching this story till the very end. Your support means more than words can ever say. If you felt the depth of this journey, don't forget to give it a like, share it with someone who needs it, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel. Together, we'll keep bringing powerful stories to life, and your presence here makes all the difference.